The question on the menu in today's episode is, do Americans have a constitutional right to crypto? Let's talk about the right to crypto portion of things. When we say a right to crypto, what exactly do we mean? And this is not defined in the Constitution. This is just sort of like, I guess, for the purposes of this podcast and crypto in general, what are the rights that we're actually talking about? I'll give you one kind of definition to maybe work from, and then let's play around with it. So it was interesting that the Republican Party, the GOP platform paper came out. And they have this very tiny section about crypto. So this is the Republican Party platform, a couple of weeks ago. And it's under the title of Championing Innovation. It says crypto. And it says, Republicans will end Democrats' unlawful and un-American crypto crackdown. So very polarized language, of course. Hey, this is politics, one party versus another. But let's get to the actual rights. And oppose the creation of a central bank digital currency. I'm not sure that's what we're talking about here, but we will defend the right to mine Bitcoin and ensure every American has the right to self-custody of their digital assets and transact free from government surveillance and control. There's a few things there I like in the latter part of that definition. The right to mine Bitcoin, so you can mine if you want, you can validate transactions, and the right for Americans to self-custody their own assets. So you don't have to hold crypto in a bank, in an exchange. You can go bankless, private keys in your hands. You know what we say, not your keys, not your crypto, okay? That would be part of the right to crypto, I would imagine, and transact free from government surveillance and control. So respect the blockchain's ability not to inject OFAC sanctioning, something like this, I would say as part of that. Anyway, what do you think is a good working definition of the right to crypto when we say that?
Yeah, so I'll start with the rights part, and then I'll move to the kind of what is crypto part, because they're two separate related questions. So when we talk about rights, we have to understand them in the context of freedoms. So freedom is what you are. The right is how you have that freedom. So if you have the freedom of speech, that means you can express yourself. The right to freedom of speech means the government cannot restrict that freedom. So when we talk about freedom, at least in the context of the Bill of Rights, there's one major element. Again, it's individual right oriented, where we say there's two very important things. Freedom of conscience, which means you can think the way that you want and express yourself the way that you would like to. And there's also an element of economic freedom, which means commercial activity. So the right to engage in the businesses that you would like to do, the right to retain the fruits of your labor, the right to retain property. So they are expressing kind of the more economically oriented elements of it. But crypto is obviously bigger than that. And so I will define crypto when we talk about it in three ways. There's one, the code that is crypto, whether that's encryption technology or blockchain technology, the actual zeros and ones that we express ourselves. There's also the act of encrypting. So by the virtue of like behaving in a certain way, the act of encryption. And then third, there's digital property. So the ideas of crypto, the act of encryption, and the things that are digital property. So that's the three ways we can talk about it. So what do we mean when we say the right to crypto? In the abstract, in effect, it is the right to and the means to our freedom. So the tools and the subject of our freedoms. The right to enjoy freedom and the way that you can assert those rights. So you can have crypto, you can express yourself through crypto, and you also have the right to use crypto, as they say, to make sure that you are free from what is unlawful or unnecessary government intervention. That's what we mean when we say the right to crypto.
I really like that definition. Okay, so then what we're talking about when we say crypto, just to recap that, is the code itself, like that's like kind of the noun. Mm-hmm. Maybe that almost corresponds a little bit. We'll get into this. I don't want to step forward too quickly, but maybe that corresponds to something like speech, right? Code speech. It's just something that's sort of written down and put out there. The act of encrypting. So this is a verb. So like individual citizens would be able to encrypt, businesses would be able to encrypt. That's part of the preservation, and the digital property itself. So I guess that implies maybe the crypto assets, the tokens, that sort of thing. And the right to crypto is like even broader than that kind of like GOP party definition. You're broadening it, and this is why I appreciate a legal mind thinking about these things, and just like not me, is just all of the tools that allow for crypto freedoms and the right to fully enjoy crypto in its various use cases. I think that's a good definition. It does feel broad. Let me ask you though, what would not be included in this type of a right?
Yeah.
Okay. So like, let's take the inverse of this, because this does feel broad, and I can hear some people listening and saying, well, like, what are you crypto bros asking for, like the right to launder money, or to evade taxes, or to fund terrorist organizations? Are these the rights that you're really looking for in this broad definition? So what is not included or implied by this right, would you say?
Yeah, so that in summary is all of constitutional law in one question. What is not included, right? So even the founders understood that while we were describing what they termed as fundamental rights, so the rights that we as humans enjoy because we exist. Even though we're talking about those things, they do say that those rights aren't absolute, right? They talk about the restriction of rights without due process, without just compensation, unreasonable searches and seizures. So really finding that dividing line is all of what constitutional law is about, is what is included and what is not included. So a very easy example is you do not have the right to fund terrorism. That is something that I think is a pretty bright line rule that I think we can all agree to. The question is now, do you have the right to use something like tornado cash, which is not in and of itself the funding of terrorism, but it gets associated that way. So is publishing the Tornado Cash Code, is that a right that an American gets to enjoy? Is the use of Tornado Cash something that an American gets? What purposes do you use it for? These are all very fundamental questions that a court, especially the Supreme Court, would have to answer in the relationship to the question, what is or is not included in your right to crypto?
This is why we have an entire judicial branch, right?
That is the whole purpose.
And this is why we have a Supreme Court. This is why we have lawyers, is because the amendments themselves are very short. Like, we'll read out some of them in today's podcast. There's like not a lot of detail. And so taking your example, and you said like what's not included by these rights is the whole of constitutional law. That process gets worked out in the judicial system over years and decades, and precedent is set. We have a common law system. So the precedent gets cemented almost like proof of work, and it becomes hardened over time, and it adds more social legitimacy. That is the entire I guess realm of constitutional law and the entire judiciary, and I guess in a nutshell. And like another example that comes to mind, like just for me, is freedom of speech, for example, right? So, it says, we'll read this out a little bit later, but the actual First Amendment is, Congress shall make no laws respecting establishment of religion, and it goes on, or abridging the freedom of speech. This does not give you, the courts have decided, the right to yell fire in a movie theater. This is precedent that's been worked through the judicial system. So there are some limitations on these rights, and the way we figure out what the limitations are is by working through the court system and ultimately the Supreme Court deciding. And if there's some more ambiguity needed, then I guess the legislative branch, hops in and creates a new law. And if we all decide we really need to change something fundamental, what do? We pop in another amendment. Is this in a nutshell how civics works in the U.S.?
Yeah, that's a great microcosm for the way that we have addressed this question of what you've described. Again, is very abstract concept. So the Declaration of Independence basically says, we're free. And then the Constitution says, this is how we're going to be free. And then we get into the reality of, it's like, well, are you free to, as you say, yell fire in a theater? It's like, well, you don't have the right to threaten or scare somebody. So that's out. And again, we're just sort of like, we are refining the social protocol to more accurately accomplish the objectives of freedom. And so this is in, that is out. Can't yell fire in a theater, but you can go outside of the White House and say, with approval, that I hold up a sign that says, I disagree with blank policy of the government. So we're the whole of again, it was basically as soon as the Constitution was written and the judicial branch was established, the first cases were, well, what does this actually mean? So we've been asking this questions basically since the document was written.
Well, that's a good question. It's a fantastic question. And the beauty of this, the way this system works and the reason it's lasted as long as it has is because it has some flexibility with respect to what point on the freedom versus tyranny spectrum you kind of fall, right? So, the American hard fork from the British Empire was like a new chain that would be I guess a more freedom embracing chain than the monarchy type system. But if you go too far in the spectrum of freedom, you get something that is undesirable where you can't coordinate a society. and you get anarchy, right? This is a little bit elements of the Articles of Confederation, I suppose. There's a little too much anarchy, right? And so this is a microcosm of, individual rights. If you have too much freedom, if everyone had the freedom to say, like, own a tank, and blow up their neighbor's house if they want, like, that level of freedom would lead to anarchy. And so we're trying to find the optimal position of between tyranny and max freedom, because if you veer too far in the freedom line, you get anarchy. And so this is the entire project in the process. Let me ask another 101 question to you, Richard, which is this, and this is just a very basic question. We have said we're trying to make the case, we're about to make the case that Americans have a constitutional right to crypto. Okay. People read the document, the entire Constitution, all the amendments. Crypto is not mentioned once. Mm-hmm. It's not mentioned once, not at all. So how is it that we can confidently go into this episode and make the case that Americans have the right to crypto? It's not even mentioned here, Richard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that is one of the great things about the document and our English common law tradition is the Constitution doesn't mention a lot of things, right? It doesn't talk about the internet. It doesn't talk about cars. It doesn't talk about any particular implementation of the rights and freedoms we're describing. But the founders, collectively as a group, were some of the smartest men, if you're talking about like the Manhattan Project and the Constitutional Convention, this constellation of intellectual power coming together to address these questions, these problems. We're talking about people who were philosophers, historians, they were business owners, they were inventors. So they understood both their historical context, where we are in the grand scheme of the thing called humanity, and also that things change. So they reference things that are general, like speech or press. They didn't say you have the right to get on a soapbox in the town square and give a lecture, or you don't have the right to pen and ink, right? They talk about your freedom, which is an expression. And they also provided justifications for the reason why. So the Federalist Papers, the discussion, they took notes thankfully, they took notes during the Constitutional Convention, so we can understand that. We pair that with our English common law tradition, which allows us to do a little bit of interpreting, reasoning by analogy, where we don't have to specify every single detail. We can, in effect, say, well, we knew what they meant. And that gets into rules of interpretation and judicial discretion and standards. But we can say, well, there's words on a piece of paper, and then there's what the words mean. We're more interested about what they mean than what the actual connection of 26 letters. That's kind of where we live. And then also there is the constitutional expansion slot that is the Ninth Amendment that we'll get to. And the Ninth Amendment says, look, just because it's in the Constitution or not in the Constitution does not make it any more or less a fundamental right. So just because it's in this document does not mean that it is the only fundamental right. And just because it's not in the document means that it does not mean that it is not a fundamental right.
If you enjoyed all of that, then you'll absolutely love the Bankless newsletter. Join over 300,000 fellow readers, all for free. Click below to sign up.